We've now come to our keynote speaker. It's my distinct honor to introduce tonight's keynote speaker, our friend and Delaware State Senator Sarah McBride. Getting Sarah to Trumbull has been a real roller coaster ride. We first invited her to speak at our awards dinner in March of 2020. Of course, the pandemic was just taking hold, and we tried to reschedule, thinking the pandemic would be under control. We postponed the event a few months, but Sarah couldn't, make the new date because she was involved in a primary race in Delaware. Our event went virtual the next year, and other conflicts intervened in 2022. In the meantime, Sarah won her election to the Delaware State Senate in 2020 and was reelected handily in 2022. And we're so happy that she has stuck with us and finally made it to Kevin's hometown of Trumbull. Terry and I have known Sarah since she and Kevin were freshmen in college at American University. They worked together in the AU College Democrats Club, and in their sophomore year, they both ran for office in the AU student government. Sarah for president and Kevin for secretary. Their campaign slogan was "Ride with McBride," and most students did. So during their junior year, student government was the focus of their college experience, and they both had a very successful term. At the end of the 2012 semester, as her term as AU SG president was coming to a close, Sarah came out to the student body as transgender in a letter to the student newspaper, a letter that went viral almost immediately. Terry and I were watching all of this unfold from afar, and we were pleased and amazed to see the support that Sarah received from her close friends and peers. It seemed that most of them simply asked, "What pronouns do you prefer?" And life went on. Of course, nothing was that simple, but this generation gets it by and large. They understand that everyone should have a right to live an authentic life true to who they really are. Since that time, Sarah has worked in the Obama White House on LGBTQ issues. She advocated in Delaware for greater equality in that state. She became the press secretary of the Human Rights Campaign, became the first transgender individual to speak at a major political party in the U.S., and it was our political party, and eventually became the youngest openly transgender state senator in the country. She is now in her second term in that office, and she continues to speak out and advocate for greater equality and equity in Delaware and across the country. Sarah's journey has not been an easy one, but it is nothing if not courageous. Her book, Tomorrow Will Be Different: Love, Loss, and the Fight for Trans Equality, chronicles the ups and downs along her path, and I highly recommend it. It is very inspiring, and if you have a copy, she will be signing books after this event tonight. So it is my great honor to welcome Senator Sarah McBride to Trumbull and to our Democratic Town Committee.
Thank you so much, Doug and Terry, for inviting me 3 times to be here. It's wonderful to finally be here with you all. It is very difficult to end a program on a work night, but it is absolutely impossible to end a program and follow Chris Powell. Chris, thank you for those words. Thank you for sharing yourself with this room. No one should have to choose between celebrating their political accomplishments and celebrating their identity. And so I just want you to know that everyone in this room sees you, loves you, and is so incredibly proud of both what you have done and who you are. So please join me in giving her. I want to thank, of course, the Trumbull Democrats for organizing this evening, for inviting me. I do want to make sure that we give a round of applause to the folks who make this evening possible, the food and beverage staff that are here, who are serving us this evening. Let's give them a round of applause. It's clear you all know how lucky you are to have Nancy DiNardo as your state chair, but I want you to know that Democrats across the country know how lucky you are to have Nancy DiNardo as your chair. A year ago, President Biden appointed me to the DNC Executive Committee, and one of the first things I learned representing Delaware at the DNC is just how beloved Nancy is in the Eastern Caucus that she chairs and throughout the DNC. So Nancy, thank you so much for your leadership. And of course, once again, to Doug and Terry, thank you. Not just for inviting me here this evening, but for the son that you raised. Kevin Sutherland was one of my best friends. I met Kevin when we were, as Doug mentioned, freshmen at American University. And we bonded initially over the fact that we both had politicians' numbers who we admired in the phone. He had a congressman, I had a governor, we had a competition on who was cooler. And what I quickly learned was Kevin was much cooler than me. At American University, it's a school filled with people who want to be somebody. People who want to achieve a position, people who want to run for office. And while Kevin could certainly have done all of that, what was so clear was that he wasn't about attention. He wasn't just about politics for the sake of politics. He was about doing. He was about making a difference. And in many cases, he was doing that in quiet service, without attention, without celebration. And among our group of friends, we used to stay up at night. We talk about politics, we talk about policy, we talk about history. We usually agree on things. Sometimes we disagree on things, especially after a couple shots of apple juice when we were still in college. And what I came to learn about Kevin during our 4 years in college is that what drew him to politics is what drew me to politics. The notion that it was the place where every avenue of society converges and where you can make the most amount of change for the most number of people in the most number of ways possible. He believed in the possibility of politics, but even more than that, he believed in our country. We bonded over the mutual recognition that for all of the sins of our past, for all of the faults in our present, that the through line of our country's story was the story of advocates, activists, and a handful of courageous elected officials working to right wrongs, working to address injustice, working to bring those from the shadows and the margins of society into the circle of opportunity, to deepen the meaning of the first three words in our Constitution, we the people, to include all of us. And as we did that work as young people, we too recognized that young people have a unique place in our politics. Because when people like Chris speak, when the other young people who are here speak, when they lift their voices to share their perspectives, they speak with an incredible gravity to their voices. And it is the gravity of history. Not the history of the past, but the history that remains to be written. Because I think those in my role in elected office understand that the young people of today will be the ones that write the history books of tomorrow. They will get to decide who was right and who was wrong in this moment. And elected officials know that. And so every time the young people in this room speak, every time they participate in politics, they speak with that incredible gravity. Kevin believed in the power of young voices, and he believed in the power of our politics for all of the challenges that we face. For me, that possibility was something I found hope in as a young LGBTQ person buried deep in the closet, feeling completely alone, worried that the heart of this country was simply not big enough to love someone like me. For Kevin, that passion in that story and that possibility just came from his incredibly decent and compassionate outlook on life. The ability to see the dignity in every person, the ability to find that person in a room who wasn't getting the attention, who wasn't getting the love, to seek them out, to find them, and to learn about them, to become their friend. And as Doug and Terry talk about Kevin, one of the things that comes to mind is that in their healing, they have carried on his legacy. At American University here in Trumbull, in supporting those young voices, in carrying forward Kevin's passion for justice and equality and opportunity for every person. And as they do that, I reflect on something that the loss of Kevin reminded me of, and the loss that I faced a year before we lost Kevin, when I lost my husband Andy to cancer. I reflect on something that loss reinforces, that young loss reinforces. And that is the recognition that I think we as Democrats understand, that ideas are endless, that inspiration can always be found, but that time is the one resource that none of us can afford to waste. The recognition of what Dr. King called the fierce urgency of now. We lost Kevin when he was in his early 20s. I lost the man who would become my husband just 4 days before he passed away to cancer, when he was at the age of 27. He was a transgender man, and as two young trans people falling in love and fighting for the community we love, it felt like we had a world of possibilities and potential before us. But then cancer intervened. He was lucky enough to have health insurance, to try to get treatment that would save his life. We were both lucky to have policies like paid family and medical leave that allowed him to focus on the full-time job of getting care, and me to focus on the full-time job of being there to love him and care for him and support him through his illness, and then eventually to walk him to his passing. And in 2014, when we lost my husband Andy, in 2015, when we lost Kevin, that early loss for me instilled that sense of urgency. It's why I decided to run for office, to carry on Andy's legacy, to carry on Kevin's legacy like his parents have so profoundly done. Because at the end of the day, all of us here recognize that the political is personal. That what we're talking about here isn't abstract ideas or abstract concepts. We are talking about people's lives. Every single day matters when it comes to building a world where everyone can live their life to the fullest. Every single time we ask anyone in our society, whether we're talking about working families, people of color, women, LGBTQ people, anyone in our society, when we ask them to sit back and allow for a slow conversation to take place before we treat them with dignity and ensure them opportunity, we know we are asking them to watch their one life pass by, perhaps their one all too short life pass by, without the respect and fairness that everyone deserves. And that is too much to ask of anyone. As Democrats, we understand that fierce urgency of now. We understand our responsibility to deliver. We understand that when we're talking about a family living in poverty, there is an urgency to increase the minimum wage, so they no longer have to choose between food and medicine. When we're talking about people who are facing illness or people who are trying to welcome a child into their family, the ability to have access to life-saving and life-enhancing benefits like paid family and medical leave, we have to feel a sense of urgency. This area of Connecticut understands all too well that for the parents who worry that as they send their children off to school, it may be the last time they see them, that we must feel a sense of urgency when it comes to passing real and meaningful gun safety legislation. And of course, with the fall and overturning of Roe by the U.S. Supreme Court, we understand that for a woman who's facing the life-altering and in some cases the life-threatening decision of whether to bring their pregnancy to full term, that the fundamental right to choose and the codification of Roe under federal and state law, that we have to feel a sense of urgency to protect that fundamental human right, that fundamental access to health care. And here in Connecticut, and in my home state of Delaware, we are fulfilling that obligation. We're recognizing that our state governments have a responsibility to be both laboratories of democracy for bold ideas that meet the scope and the scale of the challenges that we face, and also last lines of defense at a time when our rights are under significant and in many cases unprecedented attacks. But we're fulfilling that obligation. Small states like Delaware and small states like Connecticut are showing that we can do big things, that we can build communities where everyone is lifted up, where nobody gets left behind. We are offering, through democratic leadership, an alternative vision for this country that upholds and protects the dignity of every person and every family. And that's why the work of this Democratic committee, of our Democratic parties at the local, state, and federal level are so important. Because when democracy is at risk, we know that government gridlock and government not meeting the needs of people only foments authoritarianism, which is why we need to elect local Democrats who deliver on the day-to-day quality of life issues that people care about, making sure that Trumbull is leading the nation in pickleball infrastructure. Because when local Democrats deliver, when we make government responsive to people, democracy becomes healthier. When state governments increase the minimum wage, pass paid family and medical leave, ensure gun safety measures are implemented in law, codify Roe, when we respond to people and protect their rights, we bolster democracy. And at the federal level, all that we do at the local and state level will not matter, ultimately, if MAGA Republicans gain control of the White House and Congress. Every 2 years, politicians come before crowds like this and they say, "This is the most important election of your lifetime." And we all roll our eyes. But the reality is that when you are one election away from election deniers getting into public office, when you're one election away from those who foment insurrection getting into power, when you're one election away from those who love authoritarian regimes over democratic governments getting into power, when you are just one election away from democracy being at risk, every election becomes the most important election of your lifetime. And so as we look toward 2024, I'm here to say thank you. I'm here to say, like Chris said, vote like hell. Knock on doors like hell. Make phone calls like hell. Get your friends out to vote like hell. Donate to your local and state Democratic Party like hell. Because we need you to keep up the fight. I'm going to close, because it is so late, by saying I know that as I stand in front of a crowd like this, I don't have to tell you what the problem is. You know. I don't have to tell you how important this work is. You know. I think the most important lesson that I try to remember in moments like this is that we have reason for hope. Because I think right now it's easy to think that our politics are just fundamentally broken. It's easy to wonder whether we're just staving off catastrophe temporarily. It's easy to feel like this time might be different. That maybe the problems are just too big. Maybe our society and technology have created a scale of challenge that is insurmountable. I get that sense. I feel that degree of hopelessness sometimes. I then think about the fact that what we have experienced over the last 20 years, what Kevin and I experienced in college in the height of the Obama administration, this false sense of security, this sense that if we work for it, change is inevitable, that's the exception in American history. It feels like we can't see the light at the end of the tunnel. It feels like for the first time in a while that if we do X, Y, or Z, we're still not sure it's going to work out. The reality is that for every generation preceding us, there have been moments in our history where they couldn't see the light at the end of the tunnel, where they didn't know that it would all work out. Enslaved people singing freedom songs around a fire in 1850 had no reason to believe that slavery would be abolished in 2 decades. Children working in factories, losing their limbs, had no reason to believe that the progressive era was on the horizon in 1890. Unemployed workers standing in bread lines along city blocks in the late 1920s had no reason to believe that our nation would experience an economic revolution that would usher in a New Deal and a safety net that would ensure that no future generation would experience a depression of that kind again. As John Lewis crossed that bridge in Selma, facing police violence, it was entirely plausible to believe that the Voting Rights Act would never become law. This month in June, we recognize Pride Month. And several decades ago, as LGBTQ people rose up at the Stonewall Inn, facing government persecution for simply living openly as their authentic selves, they would have never believed that within 4 decades, marriage equality would become the law of the land nationwide. They couldn't see the light at the end of the tunnel. They didn't know that it was going to work, but they persisted. They summoned the hope, and ultimately they found the light. And that is our charge in this moment, to summon our hope, to find the light, and ultimately to ensure that the story of this moment in America isn't the story of MAGA Republicans, isn't the story of Donald Trump, but rather the story of us transforming change that maybe once seemed impossible, not just into possibility, but into reality. So that generations from now, a young person will grow up and learn about this moment and that progress in their history books, and never have to know what it felt like to all of us, because they will never know anything different. And that will be because of all of you. Thank you all very much. It's an honor to be here. It's a privilege to be with you on this stage.
Another round of applause for Sarah, please. You are the definition of an inspiration. Thank you for that message.